series that's entitled Spiritual Starvation. And we drew from Hebrews 5, which talks about we talked about, Paul says, the writer says, by this time some of you ought to be teachers. You ought to be moving on to maturity and to solid food, but I'm still having to give you formula because you're not mature enough to be what you ought to be. And I think it's one of the truly difficult things about ministry is there are people who are in the body of Christ who simply don't want to grow up. They like the position that they're in, they like the place that they're in, and they're content with just living on the milk of the word rather than moving on to maturity. That's a fact. And you get in dialogue with people and you discover that over the years. This morning I said I was going to move on to start talking about what that food is. What do we move on from milk to solid food that helps us to grow and to mature? And so this morning, if you have your Bibles, turn to John, the 6th chapter. I'm going to spend a little time here and then I'm going to Exodus, but that's okay. Now the 6th chapter of John gives an account of, first of all, the feeding of the 5,000. That's how the chapter starts. And Jesus takes 5 barley loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people with it. Bread and fish. And he had so much left over in the blessing that they gathered in 12 baskets of bread. In the biblical days, bread was the substance of life. That's what people lived on, bread. And it was the main part. As I began to think about that, I was thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, there's so many things wrong with bread. I mean, your doctor, the first thing, if you got a heart problem, the first thing they want you to give up is bread. Get rid of that. So I began to think, well, how does that compare with biblical days? Because in the Bible, God rained down, we're going to talk about this morning, manna, which was bread from heaven. And they ate bread all the time. It was, and Jesus is going to say in this particular chapter, he's going to say, I'm the bread of life. And I'm thinking, today, here's the difference. In Jesus' day, there were 3 main grains. Today, guess how many grains of wheat and grains of barley and grains that are manufactured out of test tubes that we eat today?
10,000.
How many?
10,000.
Nope.
More.
Jesus, in biblical days, there were 3. Today, there are 25,000. And it's produced, most of it is produced, the grains have been produced in laboratories. And so, much of the wheat we take in today, much of the grains we take in through our bread today is synthetic junk. And the way they even produced it, I mean, they did it by hand or stone mill. Today, we pulverize it into a powder, which goes straight to sugar. Because carbohydrates, that's basically what bread is a carbohydrate. Well, your body needs certain carbohydrates, and in biblical days, it needed iron, it needed niacin, it needed certain things to keep you healthy. And a carbohydrate is important for brain function. But we take in carbohydrate because we are addicted to it. We are. I mean, you know. And so there's the difference when people start saying, well, in the Bible, we shouldn't be eating bread but in the Bible it says, yeah, eat it. It's a staple to life. And it was relatively inexpensive to produce. I don't think it's very expensive today to produce, but by the time you pay retail and, you get the truck driver, everybody gets paid and bread turns into something pretty expensive. But the bread in the biblical days is, you frame. You know, it didn't stay on the shelf and turn green. You know what I'm saying? So the bread that we're talking about, we're not talking apples and apples here. It's entirely different. If we went, and you can go back to a biblical bread recipe. Of course, nowadays, to eat healthy, it costs you more than if you ate junk. Amen? I mean, that's just, you know, that's it. But we consume the wrong kind of bread. And I thought that was really important that I found out in that study, because the bread that we need to really be taking in is the bread of life, which is Jesus Christ. So Jesus feeds the 5,000. Then, right after that, he walks on the water. And they're looking for him. They're trying to find him. He went across the sea, and then he comes back, and they're trying to locate Jesus as if he was lost. Verse 25 is where I want to begin. It says, when they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked, Rabbi, when did you get here? They went across on the boats. He strolled across on the water. I'm in the 6th chapter of John, 26th verse. Jesus answered, very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill. That's human nature, isn't it? They didn't focus on the fact that he fed 5,000. They didn't focus on the fact that he walked on the water. They focused on the fact is, hey, you got some more for us to eat? He says, do not work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For on him God the Father has placed his seal of approval. I promise you, when he said that, this is what they did. They went, huh? Did he say we're getting biscuits or not? That's what they wanted to know. Then they asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? Now this is in the middle of the bread of life. I don't want you to miss this, because this is the most important question anybody can ever ask. But listen to how they ask it. What can we do to do the works of God? You see, the Jewish system was a system of works. Keep the 10 Commandments, keep the holidays, keep the festivals, don't, and occasionally do, and it all depended on them. But that was the system of the law. The law required effort. If you didn't exercise the effort, you were condemned. But notice, nobody in the Old Testament talks about heaven. They believed in an eternal reward, but they didn't talk in terms of going to heaven, of having a relationship with God. They just tried to appease God by their works. So it's normal that they would ask the question, what do we do to do the works of God? And Jesus said, the work of God is this: to believe in the one he has sent. Right? So faith, my friend, is a work. He doesn't say mentally acknowledge. He doesn't say mental assent. In other words, if you just mentally acknowledge that, see, that's what some people preach. If you just mentally acknowledge that Jesus is the Son of God, you're good to go. That's not what he is saying. He's saying that you have to have that. James talks about faith without works is dead, being alone by itself. That's Jesus saying the same thing here. Faith and works go hand in hand. They're part of the same thing. You want to do the work of God, then believe in the one who he has sent. Amen. Why is it that we get a little confused in the grace message? Because sometimes people hear that they don't have to do anything. a miracle happens, and oh, I do have a check for $100 in my wallet. And I just took it out and dropped it right there and said, who? The first one that gets to it can have it. And everybody continued to sit. And nobody came up and received it. The gift is available, but you got to get up off of your pew and come take it, don't you? It is required that you have to receive it. So the message of grace is for those who will receive the message of grace. We talk about in the football terms, there's a guy that's out on the wide side, and he runs pass patterns, and we call him a receiver. The job for the quarterback is to get the football to the receiver. And it's not a completion until he catches it, secures it, and is down. Everybody with me? You are technically not a receiver if you can't catch the ball. The University of Florida have a lot of guys called receivers, but and we used to say when someone hit him right in the hands and it go through the hands, we'd say, "Ooh, he hit him in a bad spot." Right in his hands. He couldn't catch it. So to receive grace, to have grace, you have to receive it. To take the gift, you have to receive it. So Jesus says to them, you have to believe. You have to receive me. And that gets a little mixed up in the church message. A lot of people think they are receiving the church doctrine. Doctrine doesn't mean anything if you don't first receive Jesus. So they ask him, what sign will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? They're asking Jesus to do something now. What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus says to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They quickly moved to the place of saying, oh, wait a minute. Moses gave us bread to eat. See, they were crediting Moses with the miracle. They weren't crediting God for the miracle. So, I want to take a look at this for just a minute. Exodus, the 16th chapter. You can turn. And this is the nation of Israel that is leaving Egypt, headed to the promised land, and they get out there and 2 million people say, what are we supposed to eat? Good question. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. They're out 2 days. 2 months. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said, if only we had died in the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into the desert to starve this entire assembly today. They're complaining against Moses. Do you understand the connection they have not made yet? They think Moses freed them. They think Moses brought them on this journey. And they're grumbling against him, even though they've seen the hand of God. They've seen him part the Red Sea. They've seen him kill all the Egyptians. They've seen him pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night. And all of a sudden somebody says, I'm hungry. We just stayed in Egypt. At least we had some, food. We're going to go out here and die. Never dawned on anybody that God brought them out there for a reason, and He didn't bring them out there to die. Because you see, but they're believing in the works. They're not believing in the magnitude and grace of God. So they're locked into 400 years of doing it this way. Their faith has never been challenged. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the sixth day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on every other day. Why were they supposed to bring in twice as much on the sixth